Hello again, VRS staff. We're back again, this time to review module number 3, the process for serving students. This is the third training module in a series of 5 for all VRS staff that were recorded in February of 2021. Here is our agenda for this module. We'll be reviewing VRS Student Career Services. We'll talk about assessing pre-ETS needs. We'll talk about employment plans and then case notes. So let's start with a review of VRS Student Career Services. Who we are. Although we provide services to students who are eligible for VR, as well as those who are potentially eligible for VR, we are just one program, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, or VRS. We provide student career services, also known as Pre-ETS or Pre-Employment Transition Services, to all high school students we serve. This needs to be our unified front-facing message to schools, families, students, and other stakeholders. It is why we created one set of marketing materials for all students. And speaking of outreach materials, linked on this slide are the following primary materials for you to use to market our services to students. We have a short video, a one-page flyer, and then other information on our Deed VRS webpage. The message to our stakeholders, especially schools, is that there's no wrong door for referrals. There are at least 2 VRS staff that serve every high school, and they need to work together to make sure that students get pre-ETS and any other supports that they need. In other words, schools can refer a student to a pre-ETS representative or to a counselor, and they will figure out the best way to meet a student's needs. And we provide a continuum of VRS student career services. As much as possible, we want pre-ETS services to potentially eligible students, or PE, to be the first step for most students referred to us who are in grades 9 through 11. These services get students started in our VRS student career services. They also help us understand who needs more intensive VR services, as well as who's gotten all they need through this initial level of service. Step 2 is VR services for students that need more support. Of course, pre-ETS are still provided, but other services can be provided as well. And they last until a young person reaches a successful employment outcome. Keep in mind that there should be no harm in getting any student started in PE services first. We can always help them apply for intensive VR services at any time. And there also isn't a need to have schools, students, or families choose which type of service to apply for. As the default, have them start in PE services whenever possible. On the flip side, if students or families ask to apply for the full VR program, we would never deny that option either. And it's important to understand that this graphic represents generally how we would like our full program to be working. But each team, with the leadership of their RAM, may have slight differences in how this continuum works due to any number of factors that come into play, such as rural versus metro delivery, staffing, as well as options that are available to you within schools and with your providers. Here is another way to look at how the ideal system works at an even broader view, because we can't forget that schools are the primary provider of pre-employment transition services. And because of that, there will be many students that won't even want or need VRS. So the outermost circle represents all students who are in a high school, regardless of whether they have a disability or not. Our state requires that every student has a personal learning plan, or PLP. And as a part of each school's PLP process, which may be called different things in each school, oftentimes it can be referred to as career and college readiness programming. There should be many ways that students get support to explore career options. Some schools have career planning embedded in classes. Some offer electives within career and technical education, and some have job shadow days and other events like that. The next circle represents all students with disabilities who need extra supports beyond what is provided to the general education population. Of course, students who are in special education have an IEP, which outlines transition services along with those personal learning plan options that are available to them. The next circle brings us into VRS. Again, we would like to see that students with disabilities that don't get their needs met by school services alone through PLP or the IEP get access to our VRS services for potentially eligible students first. And then the final circle represents those students who need more supports than they can get through the PE services. And those are the students who would then be served by the VRS VR program. This slide indicates what each staff person and service can provide to students. You'll see that the Pre-ETS representatives who provide services to potentially eligible students are able to provide the 5 required pre-employment transition services. So again, job exploration, counseling, work-based learning experiences, etc. The 4 Pre-ETS coordination services, which is 1, attend IEP meetings, 2, work with career force partners and employers to develop work-based learning experiences. Number 3, work with schools to coordinate Pre-ETS services. And number 4, attend person-centered planning meetings for students who have a Medicaid waiver. And lastly, our Pre-ETS representatives are also able to provide auxiliary aids in support of Pre-ETS to students who have disabilities that impact communication. VR counselors, on the other hand, in providing intensive VR services, are able to provide the same things as Pre-ETS representatives, but in addition, they're able to provide services in support of Pre-ETS, as well as any other needed VR service. So let's talk more about going from being potentially eligible to being served by our full VR program and the teamwork that's necessary for that to happen. So if a student who is potentially eligible needs more support, they may be referred to a counselor at any time. RAMs, Pre-ETS representatives, and counselors should work as a team to make decisions about services. So Pre-ETS representatives in consultation with their team should be taking stock. Does a student have additional support needs after graduation or turning age 22? This consideration is particularly important as the student is entering their senior year of high school. It is ideal for the transition from the Pre-ETS rep to the counselor happen early enough for the counselor to get to know the student and their IEP team when they're in special ed, to gather information from the school that will help them with providing services after high school. If the student is continuing high school with an 18 to 21 transition programming, that is also a good reason to refer the student to a counselor. Also, we want to be thinking about at this time, does the student need specific VR services? A prime example is when a student needs a work-based learning coach in order to be successful in a work experience. But we want to think about, is that going to be happening in the near future or not? Because even younger students with more significant disabilities can be served by Pre-ETS representatives through PE services. It may be apparent that the student may need extra supports in the future, but if that isn't needed now, then they can be served through PE until they do need them. And this graphic represents the 3 primary scenarios for how students typically move through VRS student career services. Student A has applied for Pre-ETS services for potentially eligible students and then receives Pre-ETS services. This student doesn't need anything beyond the 5 required services, so they never apply for intensive VR through a VR counselor. Student B has also applied for Pre-ETS services for potentially eligible students and then receives Pre-ETS. However, they need more support than just the 5 Pre-ETS required services, so they apply for our intensive VR program. If they are eligible for VR and are within an open priority category, they will then receive both Pre-ETS and other needed VR services from the counselor. Lastly, student C applies directly for our full VR program with the counselor without starting with PE services first. If they're eligible for VR and are within an open priority category, they will then receive both Pre-ETS and other needed VR services from the counselor. It is also important to keep in mind that Pre-ETS should look the same, whether a student is potentially eligible or eligible for VR. So that doesn't mean that we take a cookie cutter approach with all students or provide the exact same thing to each student, but it does mean that the 5 required Pre-ETS services are defined the same way for eligible and potentially eligible students. And when we refer students to providers, they should provide them the same way to both populations as well. Furthermore, Pre-ETS representatives and counselors essentially go through the same process in providing Pre-ETS. Both assess a student's Pre-ETS needs, both review service options through informed choice discussions, and both ensure that the Pre-ETS services are adequately provided. Who provides them is what might look different. We ask that Pre-ETS representatives refer students to contracted providers as much as possible. Counselors may often be providing Pre-ETS to students directly, but they should keep in mind that they too can refer students to providers if any of the, or to receive any of the 5 Pre-ETS services as well. And that leads to the final point on this slide, that while understandably group services have been more difficult to provide during the pandemic, it's something to be thinking about going forward as counselors and Pre-ETS representatives are working together with their schools, because group services can be provided to both potentially eligible and eligible students. Let's move on into assessing Pre-ETS needs. There is nothing different that you need to do in order to assess the need for pre-employment transition services for students on your caseload than what you would do for any other individual that you would serve. As always, the VR needs process guides you to what services, including pre-employment transition services, should be included on the employment plan. And it is important that the process includes gathering information from the student, their IEP or 504 plan, or other disability documentation from the family and other team members such as school staff. And when you're gathering information about the student, it will be important to understand what they are currently receiving from the school or what other services they could be accessing. From there, you can work with the student to decide what VRS will provide directly or what you will refer out to a community partner. We have a Pre-ETS student survey linked on this page that can help you and the student with this decision-making process. So after the needs are assessed, you can then move into developing an employment plan with the student. These are the casework quality measures that we receive from the Rehabilitation Services Administration related to transition students. As you will see, there are 3 items that they require for all transition cases, and they all relate to the employment plan. Number 1 says an employment plan was developed and approved as early as possible, but no later than 90 days of the student with a disability entering a planning status, or by the time the student leaves the school setting, whichever occurs first. Number 2 is the employment plan includes those services that VRS will provide while the student with the disability is in school. And number 3 says the employment plan was developed in consideration of and coordinated with the student's IEP and/or 504 services as applicable in terms of goals, objectives, and services identified in those documents that facilitate an employment outcome. So to reiterate those quality case measures, the next slides give more detail on employment plans. First, be sure that you include all needed pre-ETS and other services, activities, and responsibilities that will show the services that VRS will provide during high school. Furthermore, the way that you can ensure that the employment plan is coordinated with the IEP or the 504 plan is to include services on the employment plan that the school will provide that are necessary to achieve the employment goal. This slide reviews how you can ensure that services the school will provide that are necessary to achieve the employment goal can be included on the employment plan. First, review all the goals on the IEP and include those that are vocationally relevant on the employment plan. We have an example here where a student had goals relating to increasing reading and self-advocacy skills on the IEP. The activities services on the plan then could read, increase reading and self-advocacy skills per IEP, and the progress measure could read, I will increase reading and self-advocacy skills per my IEP. That's pretty simple. Here's an example of coordinating with a 504 plan. As it reads here, Kayana's 504 plan notes that she has limitations related to focus and processing speed, and the accommodations on her 504 plan address these limitations. The activity or service on the employment plan can read, improve focus and processing speed per the accommodations in 504 plan. And the progress measure related to this can read, I will increase focus and processing speed per the accommodations in my 504 plan. And here's another helpful clarification. You no longer need to write out separate pre-ETS services onto the employment plan. Instead, you can have one service listed, pre-employment transition services. And then on the same page that you enter the service, you'll just need to be sure, it's really important, that for the service type that you click on Select, Deselect, and choose all of the pre-ETS required services that will be provided. Also know that it is just fine to enter more than one provider for this service if that's appropriate. The exception to keep note of is that if you are going to be providing or arranging for a service in support of pre-ETS, which includes work-based learning coaching, transportation, books, supplies, tools, equipment, maintenance, or personal assistance services, that those services do need to be listed separately on the plan. So here is a screenshot of the drop-down menu you see when you are selecting the service type on the plan. The 7 pre-ETS related options are listed here, and they are, first, of course, the 5 required pre-ETS services, and then we also have pre-ETS auxiliary aids and pre-ETS services in support of pre-ETS. And here's what it looks like when you click on the Select, Deselect option in order to choose more than one pre-ETS service that will be included on the plan. And finally, here's how it would look if you add pre-ETS as pre-employment transition services as the activity service when you will be providing all 5 pre-ETS required services. So you see there in the service type, they're all listed out. Many high school students are unsure of what their future goal is, which can make it difficult to write a job goal on the employment plan. But it is okay to have a broad, general job goal, although we ask you still to be as specific as possible. So here is an example. A student you serve has a part-time job as an oil changer at Fast Lube and he wants to use his mechanical ability in a full-time job, but is not sure about what exactly he wants to do in the future. So a broad general job goal could be work in the mechanical or repair field. Also remember that when you assist students in gaining work experience while they're in high school, that the job goal on the employment plan should reflect their long-term goal and not their work experience goal. So here's another example. Grant is a junior in high school, and his long-term goal is to be a nurse. However, he has never had a job, so you're going to assist him in finding an intermediate work experience where he will learn basic work skills. He is interested in a retail position for his first job. So even though you will help him in obtaining a retail job in the near future, his employment plan job goal should read nurse. The work experience should be reflected as an activity or service, and that could be, again, as simple as pre-employment transition services, or you certainly could still choose to specify work experience on the plan if you want to break it out. Note that in either case, it is not necessary to specify the type of work experience that the student would obtain. This allows for flexibility so that you don't have to change the employment plan if, say, the student ends up getting a job as a cook versus a retail position. Of course, however, you would want to document the interest for the work experience in the case notes, though. Also note that when you assist a student with obtaining a work experience or an intermediate job, that it is considered a stepping stone on the way to their final employment outcome, so you would not close the file after the student has been successful in that work experience. Instead, the file would remain open, and other VRS services and Pre-ETS services necessary would continue in order to assist the student in achieving their long-term employment goal. And speaking of long-term or final jobs, when a student obtains employment they intend to keep on a long-term basis prior to graduating from high school, it is best practice to keep the file open past graduation to ensure that they successfully transition from high school to life after high school before closing the case. Here is a frequently asked question related to employment plans. What do I do about the pre-ETS services on the employment plan when the individual no longer meets the definition of a pre-ETS service? So for instance, they turn age 22 or they're no longer enrolled in an education program. The answer is, although all pre-ETS services must end when the individual no longer meets the definition of a pre-ETS student, it is okay if those services remain on the employment plan after that time. You'll just want to remove those items the next time you amend the plan. And however, if a student still needs to continue a pre-ETS service after that time or services, you'll need to amend the plan in order to add that item or items as a general VR service on the plan instead. Let's talk about case notes. It is important to remember that when entering a case note related to a pre-ETS service, that you be sure to select the proper pre-ETS case note category. So again, RSA requires VR agencies to report on which of the 5 required pre-ETS services each student receives every quarter. Case note categories are the way we can get the best real-time information on pre-ETS services provided and/or arranged for to RSA. Here is how it looks in Workforce One. When you go to Case Note Add, this screen pops up. The category is a required section. When you scroll down, you will see the 5 required pre-ETS services listed. If you need to add more than one category, you can click on the Select Deselect option right under the drop-down menu, and then select as many as 5 case note categories. Remember that in order to use a pre-ETS case note category, that it must be selected as a service type on the employment plan. Also, don't forget that pre-ETS case note categories should not only be checked when you provided a service, but when you arranged for the service too. So arranging means to discuss, identify, plan, or schedule pre-ETS activities for a specific student. It occurs in collaboration with the student and can include the student's parents, school supports, providers, etc. So here are some specific examples of arranging for pre-ETS services. So it could be an informed choice discussion about available services, interests, and needs. It could be engaging the student's family in discussions and planning. It could be reviewing comparable benefits and services. It could be scheduling or enrolling the student in services delivered by a provider. Or it could be communicating to family and school staff the anticipated pre-ETS services to be provided and coordinating roles and responsibilities. Furthermore, keep in mind, you may also be arranging for one or more of the 5 pre-ETS required services during IEP meetings too. So when typing your case note, you should not only select IEP meeting as a case note category, but then any of the 5 required pre-ETS services that you arranged for or discussed during the IEP meeting. When this is being recorded in February of 2021, we currently have a handful of providers that have access to Workforce One in order to enter their reports into the case notes. In the near future, we hope to be able to allow all providers to have access to Workforce One. Keep in mind that these providers should not be using the 5 pre-ETS case note categories, since this is how we report on non-purchase services only. Instead, our providers should always use the pre-ETS vendor reports category. Furthermore, be sure that your case notes clearly describe any pre-ETS services that you have provided and that will be provided and why. The why is important because it helps to justify why a service is necessary, and as well as why it's coded as a pre-ETS service versus a general VR service. And here's another example as it pertains to Grant, the student we talked about earlier. Grant has never had a work experience, thus I will be referring him to XYZ or Pathways CRP to assist him with finding a pre-ETS work experience. He would like to find a retail position in order to learn basic work skills. All right, we're almost done. We're going to do another quiz. So take out a piece of paper, pause the recording, and then answer the questions on the next 2 slides. We have 7 questions. And then when you're done, press play and we'll review the answers. All right, let's review the answers. Number 1, we must coordinate employment plans with the IEP or 504 plan as applicable. And the answer there is true. Number 2, we can list broad goals or career fields as the job goal on the employment plan when the student isn't sure about their job goal. And once again, the answer is true. Number 3, a student's work experience goal should be listed as the job goal as applicable. And the answer there is false. That should only be their long-term career goal, not their work experience goal. Number 4, we should be sure to select all applicable pre-ETS categories within service type for each pre-ETS service listed on the employment plan. And the answer there is true. Number 5, I have a meeting with a student where we discuss choosing a provider who will help with supporting a work experience. Although I am not providing the service, I was arranging the service. Thus, when I enter a case note about this meeting, I would enter Pre-ETS work-based learning as a case note category. And that is true. Make sure you get credit for all the arranging that you do. Number 6, I need to be sure that a Pre-ETS service type is on the employment plan in order to use that case note category. And that is true. And finally, number 7, I would only enter IEP meeting as the case note category when I case note on an IEP meeting. And the answer would be false. You want to make sure you enter Pre-ETS case note categories discussed or arranged as well. I would imagine that you probably are discussing at least one Pre-ETS service at all IEP meetings. So, as always, if you have questions, consult with your RAM, but you can certainly contact me as well. Thank you.